Looking at antebellum reform and women's role in these reform movements is full of contradictions. On the one hand, women are redefining women's sphere and challenging the separate sphere ideology by participating in these clubs that really are not focused on simply their, nuclear family. Um, but they're upholding the separate sphere by looking to the public to try to fix it, reform it, make it better. So the American moral reform movement really rested on the assumption that women were morally superior to men and therefore had the ability to critique male society and critique things that were immoral or went against the family or what was best for the children or the home, so to speak. Right? That's their domain, and therefore they have kind of the authority of the home. So what we see is the development of really first off maternal associations, right? Groups that were focusing on helping families, helping women, helping children that were suffering, that were maybe impoverished, that were maybe lacking a moral compass, that were maybe disruptive to the, again, traditional nuclear family. An example of that would be, church groups. You see the development of Sunday school programs that women are developing to teach, Bible stories and things like that to children. You see other charitable associations being founded by women to help, again, widowed mothers or families that were poor and living in squalor, right, in these tenements. You also see the development of the American Moral Reform Society, which was targeting premarital sex and prostitution in the cities. And mind you, these are things that are mostly going on in the North, right? Again, where kind of the cult of domesticity is sort of in full swing. So this is more applicable to the North, and this is something mostly white middle class women are doing. You also see the temperance movement being a major place for women to get involved outside of the home, focusing on families or husbands who were abusing drinking, spending their family's money on beer at the saloon. This becomes sort of an area for women to critique as well. And the image that we see in the back of this slide here is, kind of showing this nuclear family who is practicing temperance. Right, you can see the image or the below the image, the fruits of temperance. Right, where the husband comes home to his family after a long day's work, rather than going to the saloon and getting drunk and coming home and possibly abusing or mistreating his family. So this is sort of an extreme way that we see kind of this middle class moral superiority being asserted throughout the antebellum years. And so a mark of being middle class was abstaining from drinking. And that was one way to distinguish the classes, right? The middle class abstain. The poor working class, they go and drink. That's sort of the mindset of the middle class at this time. Another area is the anti-slavery movement, where we really see women heavily involving themselves. And the development of the first female anti-slavery society in Boston in 1833 came about because these women, as a lot of abolitionists were speaking out about during this time, about the evils of slavery, right? Slavery is a sin, right? It is an immoral practice, and therefore women have the authority, so to speak, as the moral superiors to critique it and to do something about it. So kind of women learn a lot about organizing and petitioning and sort of the politics of how to get a social movement really working from their work in the abolitionist and anti-slavery society and circles. And this is where you start to see a lot of female abolitionists starting to really see a lot of parallels between slavery and their own condition, right? The lack of rights and property rights for married women becomes a big issue for the women's movement later in the 1840s. And this really starts from their work in the abolitionist circles. We're also starting to see a lot of women coming out to already link the sex and race and class issue. Sojourner Truth, right? A little bit later in the 1840s, will give her "Ain't I a Woman" speech in Ohio at a women's rights convention that really sought to include women of color in this women's movement, right? If we're going to be focusing on middle class white women, that's not going to be as inclusive. And so we start to see that be a focus later on as well. So the women's rights movement really is born out of women's work in the anti-slavery societies in the North. And women's rights, in a way, was a challenge to the Victorian ideology, to the true womanhood ideology, because these are women looking for political rights. They're looking to be included in the American democracy. And the first women's rights convention is held in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott host this meeting to really focus on what is it that women are seeking. How are they unequal in society? What kind of laws do they want to see changed? And they come up with a Declaration of Sentiments, which was modeled after the Declaration of Independence, and really kind of listed their grievances and listed their hopes and goals for this women's movement. And one of those things was, seeking women's suffrage, right? The women's right to vote, that was something that they wanted. And a lot of, again, what was being talked about at the Seneca Falls Convention was not necessarily looking at including working women or poorer women's issues, or even women of color's issues. Even though they were anti-slavery, they weren't necessarily always focusing on even what some of the issues of the free Black women's community in the North would have wanted. So this is kind of where we have, going back to Sojourner Truth, this image here in the slide, "Am I not a woman and a sister?" Right? This is where we start to see a lot of the complexities of the women's movement fraction. So the quote I include here is from Elizabeth Cady Stanton at the Seneca Falls Convention, that really lists, in a way, their goal, right? And I'll read the quote. "We are assembled to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed, to declare our right to be free as man is free, to be represented in the government which we are taxed to support, to have such disgraceful laws to give man the power to chastise and imprison his wife, to take the wages which she earns, the property which she inherits, and, in the case of separation, the children of her love." And in a way, Elizabeth Cady Stanton really fused some of the middle class ideology about womanhood and this sort of more radical development of women pressing for rights, and sort of fused this, right? That if women get the right to vote, if women have greater property rights, if they have these protections of the laws and the access to these rights, then she could be a better mother, a better wife, and a better protectorate of the family. So there's a lot of complexity in this work.